Yo bar, what's up and what's happening, and welcome back to It's the Yo Bar series with me, Chris Harding. I'd also like to welcome you back to the fifth installation or episode of the Diabetic Transformation course. Along with Adaption Nutrition, the Diabetes Transformation course is a free course which is literally there to help you either reverse or control your type 2 diabetes. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how your metabolism can either positively or negatively affect your diabetes along with other diseases. So, in the previous episode, in episode 4, we were talking about how your metabolism can affect everything in terms of energy expenditure and energy control. And we're also talking about the fact that your metabolism is a little bit like your little engine. It's a thing that powers you. It's literally your fuel cell. So, with external influences such as the environment that you live in and external stresses, and also internal influences such as the foods that you eat, these things can have a massive effect on your metabolism, which can either be a positive or a negative depending on how you treat it. So the positive and negative things that can affect your metabolism can create imbalances. And these imbalances are quite easy to see literally with the modern day diseases that we suffer from. So a good example of a negative imbalance will be someone who has too much stress in their life. That stress will be imbalancing the metabolism in a negative way. A way that we can look at positively reinforcing or positively balancing the metabolism is by choosing to eat better foods. Literally, something as simple as that. Just choosing to live a healthier lifestyle and eat better foods can help the metabolism. But what we're going to talk about today is how the metabolism can influence disease and how the metabolism can also positively influence curing disease. So let's strip things back to basics. When you look at the 21st century, we quite heavily as a society rely on medicines to cure us, medicines to keep us going, medicines to either cure disease or possibly avoid disease. But we actually have something of our own, and if we look after it, we can actually ward off quite a lot of diseases. And that thing is called the immune system. So our immune system is basically like a barrier, a natural barrier that protects us from anything that's coming in from an external source, anything from our environment, anything from the air that we breathe, and also through the foods that we consume. And the one thing that governs and also gives energy to our immune system is our metabolism. Our metabolism basically looks after our immune system, whilst our immune system is looking after us. So let's think about that for a second. A metabolism that is possibly damaged or hindered by the environment that's around us or by the food that we ingest is not necessarily one that's going to help aid or support our immune system. Therefore, we are more susceptible to developing diseases and also having a rundown immune system, which basically will lead to more colds, more viruses, and just feeling unwell. So, what does this mean for you and your diabetes? It basically means that by not looking after our metabolism through the environments and the stresses that we have in our day-to-day lives, and also the things that we choose to consume, that slowly but surely is going to start to depress the actual metabolism, and therefore it's also going to depress the immune system. So how does a metabolism become depressed? A metabolism becomes depressed through, as I say, the external sources, but also mainly through the foods that we choose to eat. Now, as I've said in previous videos of this course, you can start to look at foods in terms of the way that they've been processed. Okay, so if we go back to prehistoric man just for a very quick second, prehistoric man probably would have tasted nothing sweeter than just a berry. Okay, a blackberry, a raspberry, a strawberry. But prehistoric man would have tasted nothing sweeter really than a form of berry. Now, if we look at the foods that we consume today, we're having things such as additives to make things taste sweet. We're having things such as highly processed sugars to make them more sellable to you so that you buy them and that you consume them. And you can start to see that the food that we're having is nowhere near identical to the food that we would have been having plus 10,000 years ago. What does that mean? Well, it basically means that the food that you're consuming has to feed the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome is another big element within this story. The gut microbiome eats anything that you eat. So if you eat really good food, then your gut microbiome, fortunately, is lucky enough to be able to deal with the types of vitamins, minerals, bacteria that come in obviously through your mouth, through your digestive system, and your gut microbiome is basically going to be quite healthy because of the types of foods that you eat. If you choose, however, to start eating, or if you have always ate a really poor diet, what do you think is going to be a reflection upon your gut microbiome? If your gut microbiome is weakened by the types of foods that you choose to eat, the environment in which you live in, the stresses that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, this is going to have an effect on your metabolism. And then that's going to depress or lower your metabolism. And by your metabolism being lowered, which is there trying to support you and trying to support your immune system becomes lowered. Now, by your immune system being lowered, then things start to become more susceptible to be able to picking up things such as diseases where your body's not naturally being able to fight them off. Now, there's another side to this as well. The other side is that with negative foods, let's just say foods that aren't good for you, okay, they are foods that are going to be feeding your cells. Okay, so like we talked about in the previous episode with cells, that every single cell basically has a mitochondria. And within that mitochondria is like a little fuel cell for you. So every single cell has a mitochondria. It's like a fuel cell, but it's also like a motherboard. Now, if you're not feeding that cell correctly through the foods that you choose to eat, again, everything starts to become depressed. So now your immune system's depressed, your metabolism's depressed, and also your gut microbiome is depressed. In fact, studies have shown that within the gut microbiome, if you do not eat certain foods or certain types of foods, such as fermented foods or foods with some fiber, some vegetation, even if you choose to start eating those types of foods that are actually better for you, if you haven't eaten them previously within your diet, your gut doesn't actually have the bacteria it takes to be able to digest and use that food for energy. Okay, so if you're going to choose to try and improve your diet, you need to take some note in the fact it's going to take you some time. It's going to take a little bit of time for your gut microbiome to be able to start processing the better sources of food that you choose to consume. Now, if we go back to foods that are bad for us, let's just say junk food, because it's a really easy one to pick on. Let's say that someone has quite a lot of takeaways, quite a lot of junk food, and they don't really know what is going into their food. Let's say there's quite a lot of additives, quite a lot of sugar, and let's say there's too much salt and saturated fat within those meals. Those foods are not nutrient rich. Okay, so the foods that you want to choose to eat need to be nutrient rich, but these particular foods, junk food, aren't necessarily going to be nutrient rich. They're certainly going to be macro rich. They're going to be very heavy in carbohydrate, which is going to be processed, and they're going to be quite high in fats, especially saturated fats, so fat that you don't normally find in that volume, if that makes sense. So when you're eating a takeaway, or you're having processed food, or you're having junk food, the amount of fat that you're getting within that meal is much, much higher than you'd normally consume, even if you're eating like full fat steak, like a ribeye steak or something of that nature. Now, because these foods aren't nutrient rich, but they are macro heavy, that basically means that the body can only take in what it's given. Okay, so if it's given food with like junk food, which is basically crap, that goes into the system, the body's only going to be able to take what it can. Okay, so because there isn't a lot of nutrient rich foods going in, the gut microbiome isn't going to be able to feed off of that food very well. It's going to take what it can from it, but what's going to happen through choosing to eat that food is actually going to start to suppress and dull down the gut microbiome. Now, this does take quite a long time. So, for example, if you were quite good with your diet, but you actually just chose to have a takeaway on a Friday night or a Saturday night, that doesn't really matter. That's not going to make much difference. We're talking about individuals who choose to eat takeaways all the time, who choose to eat junk food all the time. One, because it's convenient. Two, because possibly they don't know any better. And three, possibly because they're not preparing other foods, or they don't know how to cook, or they don't know what foods to buy. This then means that over a long period of time, the body's going to start to intake more poorly made food, which is not nutrient rich, it's not nutrient dense, and also along with that, it's going to start to absorb toxins. It will start to absorb toxins through the gut microbiome, through your digestive system. Those toxins that are consumed over years and years and years will start to negatively impact or damage cells. Therefore, because cells start to become damaged, it starts to have a much, much larger effect. So, when you see people who choose to eat bad food or live badly, it doesn't necessarily have an effect on them right away. Okay, if they choose to eat badly, they choose to start smoking, they choose to start drinking, it's not going to have effect on them straight away. Okay, because the body is quite robust. But over time, you will start to see that really poor choices in terms of what you consume, especially with type 2 diabetes, you're going to start to see that the body becomes more and more and more affected. It's not as robust. It can't fight things off as easily. And basically, that then is a hindrance for you. And that is also going to be a reason for you to start developing modern day diseases such as type 2 diabetes. So let me give you a real life example. I have a client called Andy, and I know that he won't mind me mentioning this. Andy came to me and he'd been diagnosed with two things. He'd been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and he'd also been diagnosed with depression. And that he'd been to see a life coach, and the life coach had basically said that you need to get some exercise and you start sort of thinking about your diet and things like that. Now, Andy was quite overweight at the time and he was struggling. So he'd been told that he'd got type 2 diabetes, and he knew that he was eating really, really bad food. He was drinking a lot of coffee. He was drinking lots of fizzy drinks, whether they were diet or sugary, I don't know. So his diet consisted of foods that were basically convenient and possibly foods that just aren't the best of choices, okay? Again, like I say, they weren't nutrient dense. And when he was told that he had type 2 diabetes, his immediate reaction was to sort of go on a crash diet, okay? So he went on a crash diet. And you got to think that someone who's been eating a bad diet for, let's say, 2 decades, for a long time, their metabolism is going to be quite shot. It's going to be quite run down. And so therefore, when the individual chooses to do a crash diet where they plummet the metabolism even lower, what happens is that the metabolism becomes so low, it actually almost switches off. So when Andy came to me to look to get healthier, lose weight, and also try to do something about his type 2 diabetes, he basically had been eating badly for, let's say, 2 decades or so, and he also had decided to crash diet. And because he crash dieted, his metabolism was absolutely on the floor. And when you do that to your metabolism, it takes a long, long time to rejuvenate it. So we started working together, and for quite a long time, Andy wouldn't actually lose weight. We just could not get him to lose weight. We started to up his fitness. We started to get him to do jogging. He got a gym membership. He started going to the gym. He was having personal training sessions with me, and he was also having nutrition advice from me, dietary advice to try and help him with this diabetes. So every week, basically, we would weigh Andy, and Andy just wasn't losing any weight really whatsoever. He was losing a pound here and there, but he wasn't really losing anything substantial. And his diabetes was quite high at the time, and so therefore what we wanted to do is obviously lower his blood glucose. So after some time of working with Andy, let's say roughly between 4 to 6 months, what I realised was, and what kind of occurred to me, is that this guy has, unbeknown to him, developed type 2 diabetes. And it's something that he has done by not eating correctly, probably taking on quite a lot of stress because he owns his own business, and also in response to receiving the news that he is type 2 diabetic, he's also tried to crash diet so that he can lose weight immediately to try to reverse the problem. And by doing so, now what he's done is, rather than reversing his diabetes, he's actually just absolutely slaughtered his metabolism, and now it's going to take a long time for that to get back up. Now, when someone crashes their metabolism, basically what happens is the metabolism, almost as a defense mechanism, just drops to nothing, okay? It's very hard to stimulate the metabolism to come back up again. And the only way that you can really do that, in my experience anyway, is by writing your client a plan, a dietary plan, where they start to reintroduce better foods. You also get them to exercise a little bit, because exercise is going to be the one thing that's actually going to help spark the metabolism to come back up again. And the other thing is, as well, is that the client or the patient is actually going to have to realize that it's going to take some time for them to be able to properly lose weight again, and also rebalance their metabolism and their immune system, and also their gut microbiome, to the point where things are going to start to positively impact them. So with Andy, I'd probably say it was roughly between 1 year to 18 months until we started to notice some really significant changes. So by doing what he did previously in terms of crashing his metabolism, even though he didn't mean to, it actually took quite a long time for things to kind of get back to normal. So if I could give any individual who's listening to this any advice whatsoever, do not crash diet. If you find out the news that you're type 2 diabetic, or you're pre-diabetic, or you're already struggling with diabetes and you just want rid of this disease, the worst thing that you can do is just radically change everything, including your intake of just overall food, and just crash dieting trying to lose weight. You probably will lose weight at the beginning, and Andy actually lost over a stone, I believe, but it just wasn't good for him, and it took a long time for him to recuperate from that decision. So let's imagine for a second that you do actually have a damaged metabolism, and that the damaged metabolism is caused by an inferior gut microbiome, and also that the damaged metabolism is also affecting your immune system, and possibly you do have type 2 diabetes, you're pre-diabetic, or you're just someone who's struggling to lose weight in general. What does this mean for you? Well, basically it means that if your metabolism's damaged, it's not going to be able to use insulin, which is the hormone, to be able to regulate your blood glucose, or the glucose inside your body. So what does that mean for you? It basically means that if your metabolism isn't able to use insulin sufficiently enough, your blood glucose is going to start to rise. It's going to start to spike. Now, what has happened is that your body has become resistant to its own insulin. So your pancreas, which creates insulin, the hormone insulin, still works, and it still is producing insulin at the normal rate it always has done. If you think back to when you were born and when you were a child, your pancreas, as long as it works well, if it doesn't work well, then you've got type 1 diabetes. But as long as you have a perfectly healthy pancreas, your pancreas is going to produce insulin at a natural, normal rate. But when you start to change your diet, you start to eat badly, or perhaps you always ate badly, perhaps that's because of your surroundings or the way that you were taught to eat, socially or through family. That's kind of another subject. But let's just say that from childhood, you would have had a healthy pancreas that would have produced the right amount of insulin for you every single day. Now what's happened, by choosing to eat a bad diet, by doing that, you have actually affected your gut microbiome. And by affecting your gut microbiome, that's actually had an effect on the cells, which has an effect on the metabolism. And now the metabolism cannot produce the correct amount of insulin because there's too much blood glucose inside your system. What does that actually mean? So now you have too much glucose inside the bloodstream, and the insulin that is there is not being recognized because basically your body has now become insulin resistant. So it has a resistance to its own insulin. So even though it's there circulating around your body isn't picking it up, and therefore certain things aren't being done in time. And one of the main things that isn't being done in time is the regulation of the amount of sugar or glucose that is inside your blood. What effect this has is basically that your red blood cells, which carry oxygen and also carry carbon to and from the tissues and the cells, can't store oxygen because there's too much glucose which surrounds the blood cell. So let's just pause there for a second because I've probably got a little bit sciencey on you. But basically, let's just imagine a blood cell, okay? A blood cell carries oxygen and it also carries carbon. So when we're being active, our bodies are burning up oxygen, and when they're finished burning up, they spew out carbon, okay? Carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide leaves the body and we breathe in oxygen, okay? And this red blood cell carries oxygen to the muscle tissue, and the muscle tissue spews out carbon, and that blood cell takes it back to be recycled. That's quite easy. What's happened is that because of the way that we choose to eat, especially in the 21st century, with the types of processed foods that we eat and these highly processed sugary foods and just processed foods in general, our blood cells are no longer taking the oxygen as they should do. Why? Because the blood cell has now got a coating of glycogen around it. It's got glucose stuck to it. So you've got a blood cell. It's now coated in, let's just say, like honey. Okay, it's now coated in honey. And where the oxygen is trying to attach itself to the blood cell, can't do that because there's too much sugar there. Okay, that's because the sugar isn't being regulated by insulin, because insulin isn't being regulated by the metabolism, and also because the body doesn't recognize the insulin that it's currently producing from the pancreas. Okay, so now we've got one blood cell, which we're looking at, that can't take on oxygen, and it also can't take on carbon. So basically that blood cell has become completely useless. Now if we multiply that blood cell over and over and over again and put it into a bloodstream, you've now got blood cells that aren't working properly. Therefore, they're not carrying oxygen properly, and therefore they're not dispersing of carbon properly. And now you're starting to find that the actual tissues and the cells are not being fed by oxygen, and they're also not being fed any nutrients, because that's also the job of the blood cell. So we've looked at insulin resistance, and we've also looked at the fact that the body cannot recognize the insulin that's being produced by the pancreas, and therefore it doesn't do the job it's supposed to when regulating blood sugar. We've also looked at the fact that if we don't treat the body well with decent food, or food that which is nutrient dense, it's going to have an effect on your gut microbiome, which is going to have a huge effect on lots of different things, including hormone release and things like that, hormone control. But one of the things it's going to affect is the fact that it can't feed the metabolism. The metabolism is basically asking for energy, and the gut microbiome and the digestive system can't give it that energy because it's not being looked after by the environment in which you live in and the way in which you choose to eat. That has a knock-on effect to affecting the immune system. So now you have a low immunity. So now you have a gut microbiome which is shot to pieces, and you also have a lowered or depressed immune system. These three things are not going to do your diabetes any good and are probably some of the reason why you developed type 2 diabetes in the first place. Now, let's have a look at a fourth factor. The fourth factor is that I want you to imagine a bell curve. And if you can't think of a bell curve, basically a bell curve, very simply, goes all the way up and it comes all the way back down. Okay? So let's just say that we're driving along. And as we're driving along down the road, we notice that our car needs filling up. So we go to the petrol station and we basically fill up with petrol, nice and simple, walk into the shop. And as we walk into the shop, we see some snacks. Okay, we see a chocolate bar and we see a fizzy drink. So we decide, why not? I'm going to buy that. Okay, I'm feeling a little bit hungry. I need the concentration. I need the caffeine. I need the sugar. So you buy those snacks and drink and you go to the counter. You get back in your car. You start driving again. Now, as you're driving, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be obviously eating and drinking that highly rich, sugary food. Okay, that food and drink which has been processed. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to ingest that. And as ingesting it, your body's going to recognize as it starts to break it down that there's quite a lot of sugar there, more carbohydrate than it's actually used to. Okay. So what happens is that your blood glucose very quickly goes up. And the reason it quickly goes up is because it's being digested in the stomach. It's not even getting into the digestive system. It's nowhere near the gut microbiome. Your stomach has started to digest the sugars which are from the food and drink that you've eaten, which naturally will start to send the blood glucose higher or the blood sugars higher. Once the blood sugars are higher, insulin is then going to be released. Okay, that is the body's duty to be able to control blood sugar when it gets too high. So on the bell curve, basically what you've got is you have a incline of sugar and very quickly behind it is an incline of insulin. And eventually insulin will catch up with the sugar and it will drop it back down. And back down it goes. So I don't know if you've ever eaten something which is quite sweet and you feel quite good for a little while, especially if you have something like an energy drink. Gives you loads of energy, it's got caffeine in it, it's got sugar in it, and possibly you've had a snack as well. But then after maybe half an hour, I feel quite tired. I feel more tired than I did when I sort of ate this food, and it's supposed to be giving me energy. Well, that's insulin. Insulin has basically brought the sugar back down on the other side of the bell curve, okay? Now, if you did that once, that wouldn't really make much of a difference. But imagine someone doing that day in, day out, day in, day out, for years and years, decades and decades. Well, that up and down, those continuous bell curves, and what I call it chasing energy. So you're basically chasing energy all the time. You get an energy high, an energy dump, another energy high, and another energy dump. And basically what that does is it completely warps the ability for your pancreas, your body, to be able to create insulin enough times for it to be sensitive. Okay. Another way that I look at sensitivity with insulin is someone who drinks alcohol. So I don't know if you know anybody who drinks quite a lot of alcohol, and they're not an alcoholic. They're not someone who relies on alcohol, but they can down a little bit more alcohol than everybody else, and they're still functioning. They're still standing, talking. They can even get up and go to work the next day. What is happening is that they have become tolerant to the alcohol. So if you gave alcohol to me, I don't really drink that much because of the nature of my job. So if I had a couple of glasses of wine, I'd be semi-drunk, okay? I'd feel it because I'm not used to it. However, there are some people who can consume alcohol and not really feel the effects of it at all. It's almost like drinking grape juice, okay? That's exactly the same as what's happening with insulin. Insulin is basically not being read by the body because it's been spiking such a long time with all those little hits of energy, trying to find energy from here, there and everywhere, that they're basically, the individual is basically, one, addicted to sugar or addicted to processed food, or trying to find processed foods to give them that little bit of high, okay? And two, their insulin is constantly being spiked and back down again. There's never any balance. There's never any equilibrium. And this is what gives you part of the disease, which is type 2 diabetes, is the fact that your body becomes so out of shape with producing insulin for it to be recognized. Like I say, the insulin's still being created by the pancreas. The body just isn't recognizing it anymore. So, just to quickly summarize that for you guys, just so that it makes sense to you. Basically, someone who has type 2 diabetes has got poor balance of insulin. Okay, the pancreas is still creating insulin for them, but the body just isn't reading it. Okay, the body wants to be able to feed itself. The body wants to be able to use anything that is eaten or anything that is in reserve, such as fat stores, to be able to feed itself so it can continue along its balance of equilibrium. And obviously you get things such as highs and lows in terms of you do a lot of work in the gym, so that's going to be a lot of effort, therefore that's going to be a high, and then a low would be something where you're sleeping, okay, so you're at rest. And obviously we expect you as health consultants to be able to do those things, okay, but nonetheless, your insulin is now imbalanced if you have type 2 diabetes. That also means that at some point, most likely, that your lifestyle, your habits, your habitual patterns with your food and with your overall lifestyle, your life's balance, it has been compromised for a long, long time, okay? That has basically meant that your metabolism and your immune system have both been affected by those choices, whether you knew it or not, we're not pointing fingers here. What we're trying to do is give you a really concise example, but also a really concise explanation as to why you have these things. So your metabolism and your immune system are going to be compromised. That compromisation has come from cells, and the cells need to be fed by the microbiome, the gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome is obviously relying on you to feed it. So how do we get out of this conundrum? Well, basically what we're going to do is we need to start thinking about how we're going to eat. The worst thing, let's go back to the story of Andy. The worst thing to do is sort of say, right, okay, well, I've been eating crap for, a long time, so I'm not going to eat crap anymore. It's probably not going to happen, okay? You're probably not in the habitual pattern to be able to stop doing those things. So what you need to do is you need to write down for, let's say, 2 to 3 days, everything that you eat. Be completely honest with yourself. If you're going to McDonald's, then go to McDonald's. If you're going to go to the shop to get a chocolate bar, or if you're going to go to the fridge or to the cupboard to get whatever, you know it's bad for you, have it anyway. It's not going to make that much difference. Then what you want to do is you want to write down the things that you've eaten, and you want to reflect on them. So by the 3rd day, let's say, you're going to reflect on what you've eaten, and you're going to sit there and say, okay, is there something here that I could do just to improve, let's say, 1 to 2 things maximum? So something really easy to pick on is snacks, okay? Snacks are always terrible, okay? So one really easy thing to pick on is say, okay, I've had this chocolate bar here. Did I need to have it? No. What time of day was it? Oh, it's roughly about sort of 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Okay. Could I have had something else? Yeah, well, I didn't have any lunch. There you go. So what you've done there is you've established something that you're not very good at doing, and now you've got to try and combat that. You've got to try and say, okay, perhaps I need to have a lunch that doesn't have too much processed food in it, but also has got a little bit of nutrient rich, something like a salad, something like some vegetation, something like some meat. And if you are going to have a carbohydrate, but it's the less processed, the better. Okay, so the less amount of sugar, and don't have too much carbohydrate, not rich carbohydrate. So rich carbohydrates, things like bread, pastas, rices. Now, I'm not saying not to have them. I'm just saying don't have a lot of them, because they are actually going to be quite high levels of carbohydrate. Therefore, that's going to mean quite high levels of glycogen overall once it's consumed and digested by the body. So the development of your diabetes has come from metabolic damage, and it looks a little bit like this. Unhealthy lifestyle factors performed over a long period. which is equal to a lowered metabolism and also a damaged gut microbiome. A lowered metabolism and a damaged gut microbiome will then lead to an improper rejuvenation of cells and a constant stress of the body. An improper rejuvenation of cells and also an overstressed body. As a consequence of this, over decades, chronic health conditions can occur. So ways in which you can start to repair your metabolism are going to be things such as exercise, sleep, rest, recovery, enjoying your social life, and basically trying to just reverse some of the things that you may have done unknowingly or knowingly, and these things have actually led to helping develop type 2 diabetes. So the way in which you can up your metabolism is just by doing something simply as drinking more fluid, okay? Another way that you can up your metabolism is by starting to exercise. If you don't exercise at all, then obviously starting exercise is a good thing. If you are in a state where you are trying to exercise but you're finding it difficult, then you need to obviously work on your habits and you need to work on your routine. Another way in which you can obviously up your metabolism is by starting to consume better choices of food. Another great way that you can rest your metabolism, which also eventually helps it to rejuvenate, is by resting and by sleeping and getting a decent night's sleep. So guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, you have been brilliant. I hope you found this video insightful, helpful, and perhaps a start for you to be able to improve your health. If you have any questions or you have any comments, then please leave them in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video and also subscribe to the channel. Knowledge will always conquer diabetes. Improve your gut microbiome, up your metabolism, be fit, be healthy, and of course, be a boss bar.
It's the Yoba series.